I don't know what's more impressive, Jack Johnson's boxing skills or his ability to marry white women. Who knew a man so brash would keep such secrets? As the first African-American world heavyweight champion, his rise in the early 1900s defied the deeply entrenched racism of his time. Unapologetically confident, Johnson's bold lifestyle and unparalleled skill made him a symbol of resilience and defiance. However, behind his monumental achievements lies a life marked by incredible tragedy and injustice, stories so shocking they're almost hard to believe. In this narrative, we will uncover the darker chapters of Jack Johnson's life, from relentless racial persecution and legal battles to heartbreak and a tragic end that underscores the discrimination he fought against his entire life. These tragic details not only reveal the cost of his courage but also serve as a window into the systemic inequalities of his era. By exploring his story, we aim to understand the triumphs, struggles, and lasting legacy of one of history's most extraordinary figures. Early life and challenges. Jack Johnson's story begins on March 31, 1878, in Galveston, Texas, where he was born Arthur John Johnson, the son of Henry and Tiny Johnson, former slaves. Jack was the third of 9 children in a household that, despite its humble circumstances, was filled with love and resilience. His father worked as a janitor and dock laborer, while his mother supported the family as a domestic servant. Raised in a racially segregated society, Johnson faced the harsh realities of systemic racism from an early age. While Johnson received a basic education in local schools, his formal schooling was frequently interrupted by the need to work and help support his family. From a young age, he took on various odd jobs, including working as a dock laborer, stable hand, and janitor. These physically demanding jobs not only provided financial support but also helped him build the strength and endurance that would later become hallmarks of his boxing career. Johnson's physical presence, strong, confident, and unyielding, was a reflection of the early struggles he endured. The birth of a fighter. Johnson's first exposure to boxing came during his teenage years. Boxing at the time was a rough and unregulated sport, often taking place in the back alleys and saloons of cities like Galveston. These early matches were informal and brutal, with fighters competing for small prizes and bragging rights. Johnson's natural athleticism and determination quickly made him a standout. He later recalled these early days, saying, "I learned how to fight by watching others and by taking a lot of punches, but I never backed down. I always got back up." It was during this time that Johnson encountered Frank Childs, a prominent local boxer who would become one of his earliest mentors. Childs recognized Johnson's raw talent and began training him, teaching him the fundamentals of boxing and emphasizing the importance of strategy and technique. Under Childs' guidance, Johnson began to understand that boxing wasn't just about brute strength, it was a science. "Frank Childs taught me the science of boxing," Johnson later said. "He showed me that it was about skill, timing, and intelligence." The lessons Johnson learned from Childs would become the foundation of his career. In addition to developing his skills in the ring, Johnson also developed a reputation for his cleverness and ability to outthink his opponents. Even in these early days, he demonstrated the qualities that would later define him as a fighter: quick reflexes, exceptional defensive skills, and a keen ability to read his opponent's moves. Though Johnson was honing his craft and gaining confidence in his abilities, his path was anything but easy. The racial climate of the late 19th century meant that opportunities for a young black fighter were limited, and he often had to contend with prejudice and discrimination both in and out of the ring. Breaking barriers. Johnson's early life and challenges laid the foundation for his later success and resilience. The lessons he learned during his childhood and early career about strength, perseverance, and self-worth would become central to his identity as both a fighter and a man. Through hard work, determination, and an unwavering belief in his own abilities, Johnson began a journey that would not only change his life but also leave an indelible mark on the history of sports and civil rights. Jack Johnson's rise to fame was not just a personal triumph, it was a groundbreaking journey that redefined the possibilities for African Americans in sports and beyond. His professional boxing career began in 1898 with his debut match against Charlie Brooks in Galveston, Texas. The victory, though modest in prize money and recognition, marked the start of a career that would eventually place Johnson at the center of both the boxing world and the fight for racial equality. In 1902, Johnson achieved his first significant milestone when he defeated Frank Childs in Los Angeles to claim the colored heavyweight championship. At the time, racial segregation in boxing mirrored the societal divisions of the era. Black fighters were systematically excluded from competing for the more prestigious heavyweight title held by white champions. Separate titles like the Colored Heavyweight Championship were created to allow black boxers to compete, but they came with far less recognition and opportunity. For Johnson, this victory was both an acknowledgement of his growing dominance in the ring and a stepping stone toward his ultimate goal, to break the racial barriers that kept him from competing at the highest levels of the sport. Despite his success, Johnson faced immense resistance from white promoters and fighters who refused to give him a chance to compete for the world heavyweight title. Undeterred, he continued to fight and win, building a reputation as a skillful and strategic boxer. Johnson's ability to outthink and outmaneuver his opponents became his trademark, and his unyielding determination eventually forced the boxing establishment to take notice. The historic title fight. Johnson's opportunity to fight for the world heavyweight title finally came in 1908 after years of being denied the chance. He secured a match against Tommy Burns, the reigning champion. The fight took place on December 26, 1908, in Sydney, Australia, and it was a historic moment in both sports and society. Leading up to the match, Burns, like many white champions before him, had been reluctant to face a black challenger. It was only the promise of an unprecedented $30,000 purse that persuaded Burns to accept the fight. Johnson's historic victory over Burns was met with a mix of awe, outrage, and fear. For African Americans, it was a moment of immense pride and inspiration, a tangible proof that barriers could be broken. For many white Americans, however, Johnson's ascent was seen as a direct threat to the racial order. The backlash was swift and severe as the search began for a great white hope who could defeat Johnson and reclaim the title for the white community. The most high-profile of these challenges came in 1910 when former heavyweight champion James J. Jeffries came out of retirement to face Johnson. Dubbed the Fight of the Century, the match was held on July 4, 1910, in Reno, Nevada, and it carried enormous social and racial implications. Jeffries, who had never fought a black opponent during his career, was touted as the man who would restore racial pride and supremacy. The Fight of the Century. As the rounds progressed, Johnson's dominance became more apparent. By the 15th round, Jeffries was knocked down twice before his corner threw in the towel. Johnson's victory over Jeffries was a monumental achievement that symbolized resilience and racial pride for African Americans. It was a rare and powerful moment of vindication in a society that consistently sought to marginalize and oppress them. However, the social backlash was immediate and violent. Across the United States, race riots erupted, fueled by white anger and frustration over Johnson's triumph. These riots, which resulted in numerous deaths and injuries, underscored the deep racial divisions of the time and the resistance to Johnson's success. Despite the backlash, Johnson's reign as heavyweight champion from 1908 to 1915 was a period of unparalleled dominance. He defended his title multiple times against formidable opponents, using his exceptional defensive skills, quick reflexes, and strategic mind to remain at the top. Johnson's style of boxing, characterized by his ability to slip punches and counter with precision, set him apart from his contemporaries. Yet, his success was constantly overshadowed by the racial discrimination he faced. Many white champions continued to refuse to fight him, and his victories were often met with derision rather than celebration in the mainstream press. Johnson himself was unapologetic about his achievements and his right to live as he chose, famously saying, "I am free to be what I want to be." The fall from grace. By 1915, Johnson's reign came to an end when he lost to Jess Willard in Havana, Cuba, under controversial circumstances. The fight, which lasted 26 grueling rounds, ended with Johnson being knocked out. Many speculated that the defeat was intentional, orchestrated as part of a deal to allow Johnson to return to the United States without facing further legal troubles. Regardless of the truth, the loss marked the end of an era but not the end of Johnson's influence. A controversial personal life. Jack Johnson's personal life was as bold and defiant as his career in the boxing ring, often making headlines and sparking outrage in a deeply segregated society. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of his life was his high-profile relationships with white women, which were seen as a direct affront to the racial norms of the early 20th century. During a time when interracial relationships were not only taboo but also illegal in many states, Johnson openly courted and married white women, unapologetically defying societal expectations. His relationships became a focal point for public scrutiny and condemnation. One of his most infamous relationships was with Lucille Cameron, a white woman he met in Chicago. Their romance drew the eye of authorities who were eager to find any means to discredit and punish Johnson. In 1912, he was arrested under the Mann Act, which made it illegal to transport women across state lines for immoral purposes. While the law was ostensibly designed to combat human trafficking, it was often used selectively to target individuals like Johnson whose actions challenged social norms. The charges against Johnson were widely seen as racially motivated, a means of punishing him for his defiance of racial boundaries. Despite a lack of concrete evidence, Johnson was convicted in 1913 and sentenced to a year and a day in prison. This conviction underscored the systemic racism of the American legal system, where laws were manipulated to enforce social hierarchies. Johnson himself reflected on the case, saying, "They wanted to destroy me because I was living my life the way I wanted." Rather than serve his sentence immediately, Johnson fled the United States, choosing to live in exile for several years. During this time, he traveled across Europe and South America, continuing to fight and maintaining a lavish lifestyle. However, his time abroad was fraught with challenges. While he managed to stay active in boxing, the shadow of his legal troubles in the U.S. loomed large, and his financial resources began to dwindle. Living in exile also took an emotional toll on Johnson. Cut off from his homeland and constantly hounded by the press, he became increasingly isolated. The return and legacy. After his release, Johnson faced a host of new challenges. His time in prison and years in exile had taken a toll on his career, and the public's interest in him had waned. Financial difficulties plagued him, and he struggled to find opportunities to regain his former status. He worked various jobs, including performing in vaudeville shows and making appearances as a sideshow attraction, but these efforts fell far short of the acclaim and success he had once enjoyed. Despite these hardships, Johnson remained a prominent figure in the boxing world, often mentoring younger fighters and sharing his knowledge of the sport. His unwavering resilience and determination in the face of adversity continued to inspire those around him. Jack Johnson's personal life and the societal backlash he faced were a microcosm of the racial tensions that defined early 20th century America. His relationships, legal troubles, and eventual imprisonment were all shaped by the systemic racism of his time, which sought to punish him for daring to defy societal norms. Yet even in the face of relentless persecution, Johnson refused to compromise his identity or his principles. His life serves as a testament to the courage and strength it takes to stand up to injustice, even when the odds are overwhelmingly against you. A lasting impact. Jack Johnson's legacy extends far beyond his dominance in the boxing ring. As the first African-American world heavyweight champion, he opened doors for generations of black athletes, proving that skill, determination, and courage could transcend the barriers of racism. Even in the face of relentless societal opposition, Johnson's influence on boxing and civil rights is undeniable, and his life exemplifies both the power of perseverance and the heavy costs of defiance. Johnson's impact on boxing can be seen in the careers of legends like Joe Louis and Muhammad Ali. Joe Louis, who became the second African-American heavyweight champion decades after Johnson, credited Johnson as a trailblazer who paved the way for his success. Muhammad Ali, known for his bold personality in activism, often spoke of how Johnson inspired him to stand firm against prejudice and fight for justice. "Jack Johnson showed me that you don't have to conform to what society expects of you," Ali once said. By refusing to back down in the face of systemic racism, Johnson not only elevated boxing as a sport but also challenged the social norms of his time, forcing the world to confront the racial inequalities embedded in every aspect of American life. While Johnson's achievements brought him fame and adulation from some, they also made him a target for those who saw his success as a threat to the racial order. His unapologetic lifestyle, particularly his relationships with white women, defied societal norms and sparked outrage among white Americans who viewed his confidence as a direct challenge to their authority. Through it all, Johnson demonstrated unwavering courage, using his fame as a platform to confront racial injustices even at great personal cost. Tragically, Johnson's life came to a sudden and symbolic end on June 10, 1946. While driving near Raleigh, North Carolina, he was involved in a fatal car crash. According to reports, Johnson had been driving angrily away from a diner that had refused to serve him because of his race. This incident was a poignant reminder of the systemic discrimination that had shaped his entire life. Even in death, Johnson's story highlighted the pervasive racism of the era, a constant battle that he had faced head-on throughout his career and personal life. Despite the challenges and controversies that marked his life, Jack Johnson's contributions to sports and society have been increasingly recognized in the years since his passing. In 1990, he was posthumously inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame, solidifying his place as one of the greatest fighters in history. This recognition acknowledged not only his unparalleled skill in the ring but also his role as a pioneer who broke down racial barriers. In 2018, more than 7 decades after his death, Johnson received a long-overdue presidential pardon for his 1913 conviction under the Mann Act. The pardon was a symbolic gesture acknowledging the racial injustice he had endured and the courage he displayed in standing up to an oppressive system. It was a moment of historical reckoning, underscoring the enduring significance of Johnson's legacy in the fight for civil rights.